Hi, Poe. Welcome to the Blessings Podcast. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited about this conversation.
Good. Me too. Can you give us a little overview of who you are, what you're up to, and anything we should know at the outset?
Yeah, I am a healer and a spiritual guide and a lover of life and an adventurer. I live life to live. And so that is shown in my work because I'm always evolving as a human. And that's reflected in the work that I do with my clients and students. And that's exciting for me because I like movement and flow, as we'll probably discuss in this conversation. But yeah, I have like different group programs. I have one-on-one work, VIP work, deep dives with plant medicine. I basically guide people holistically in their process of healing, embodiment, expansion, and creation.
I love that. And I love the name of your whole business, the Tao of Poe.
Yeah, Tao of Po, that was actually my acupuncture practice name. And when I was trying to figure out what my podcast name was, I was trying to figure it out and like spinning wheels. And I was taking a walk one day and literally it just came to me. I was like, oh my God, it's Tao of Po. It's the same name that I've been using this
It's
whole time.
perfect. And there's actually this, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there is a book that's called The Tao
Tao
of
of Pooh.
I know.
It's so perfect. And I love that too.
I know. I think there's a little Tao in everything, personally.
Totally.
I love it. So where are you in the world?
In Miami.
Okay. Oh, so jealous.
Has honestly been a life changer for me. I was in the Northeast for 45 years. And so I've been in Miami for 2 years, moved here during the first year of COVID. And so I have never experienced winters like this before. And I'm so grateful for it.
I've been dreaming about Florida, so good for you.
I never even considered moving to Florida. That was never an option for me. Life, we'll talk about this, I'm sure,
Yes.
but like
All right.
life unfolds
Well, I can't wait to
magically.
find out how you got there. Take us back to the very beginning of your life and tell us about where you were born and what were the circumstances at the time you were born.
I was born November 7th, 1975 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I think the thing that I want to share the most is that my parents came went to Boston after being in Ohio, and that's where they had my brother. He's 5 years older than me. And it was like a shift, just what I feel into the story. Like they were making a shift into really putting their roots in, connecting with community, and really building the life that they had desired. They were doing all kinds of political work as well as spiritual. My dad used to be a Jesuit priest. So, yes, really, I'm a miracle because I wasn't supposed to be here by the idea of how my dad lived his life. He never had sex and wasn't planning on having sex because he was a Jesuit priest. So the fact that he even got married and had two children was a surprise to him. It's kind of amazing to think about that.
That is amazing. What do you think changed his mind?
He left the priesthood because they weren't practicing what they were preaching. And he had been noticing this over time. And so he ended up leaving. And then after he left, my mom, being the badass that she has crossed over, she approached him. And because he would never have approached her, he's very shy. And, he was a priest, literally a priest. So he wasn't like, he didn't have any experience like flirting or dating or anything like that because he started studying for priesthood in his teens. My mom really made it happen. She was a visionary. So I'm not surprised that she went after him.
Interesting. I don't want to take the focus too much off of you, but I'm really curious about how they met.
I believe they met in the either in the church or in the church process. Like my dad used to do a tour called the Mustard Seed where he'd preach or share around the country. And I believe that she was part of that. I honestly don't really know, which is kind of funny, but yeah, it happened and here I am.
It was meant to happen.
Yeah.
Great. So then you were born in Cambridge, and what was going on at that time in your family's life when you were born?
Yeah, they were doing the political stuff, which I don't really want to get super into. It's not like racy or anything, but I'm just not somebody who talks a lot about politics. They were really in community in that aspect. And but I think more than anything, it was like my dad was figuring out, oh my God, I'm a dad now. I have a family. My mom was a biochemist. She got her master's in biochemistry. And they were adjusting to this life as a new family. And my mom ended up quitting her job as a biochemist to become an entrepreneur and have more time with the family. I was the inspiration for that. At least that's what my mom told me. I don't really know a lot that was happening there in that time. It just felt like they were adjusting to what just
They were
building.
making a family. They were just making a life with as a family.
Yeah.
So what is your earliest memory? The first thing you can remember?
Oh, the earliest memory is a trip to China when I was 2 years old. And my brother and my mom flew there first, and my dad and I flew there after. And when I got off the plane and my mom was meeting us at the airport, her hair was cut and I started crying.
God.
I was like, ah, freaking out. I didn't recognize her. And yeah, that's my first memory.
Wow, what do you think that means?
I was very attached to my mom. I was always on her boob, breastfeeding or holding. Like my mom and I cuddled and were very close in that way. And so I think that something felt off to me. And I think there was a detachment that was happening. And then I was hoping to connect with my mom in China. And then all of a sudden, who is this lady? And I think also as a young person, I had a lot of fear of abandonment. There were moments when my mom would and I would cuddle and I'd fall asleep for a nap and I'd wake up and my mom wasn't there, but she was just in the kitchen like cooking or something, and I would get so emotional. So I can see that there is a pattern now that we talk about it of feeling like, oh, there's where is she? What's happening? Some kind of vigilance there.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. That must have been startling to be on, because that's a long flight and you're looking forward to seeing your mom and reconnecting. And then all of a sudden you get off in this completely different place and your mom is completely different.
Yeah, it was. And it's interesting that just I don't have a super, super clear moment, but memory, but I can feel it in my body. And I have a brief visual of it. And yeah, I don't even know if memories at 2 years old is very common or not, but it was very potent for me.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason why those things stick. I'm not sure what it is, but that's for us to figure out, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
I
interesting.
there is something there for sure.
Definitely. So what about other things in your early life, like in the range of elementary school kind of time? What was that part of your life like?
I would say another big memory was actually when I was around 5 years old and I went to preschool. So at that time, obviously, I was very much just around my family. And being a first generation Chinese child at that time, I just didn't know anything else besides being around my Chinese friends, not my friends, but like my parents' friends. So when I went to preschool, I could feel that I was different. That would be the first time I think that I realized, oh, I need to assimilate. There was this internal subconscious knowing that I was different and I needed to belong. I needed to fit in. I needed to be like everybody else. But really, I felt separate. My dad at that time was going to put me in Chinese school, because that's what parents did with American kids typically, is put them in Chinese school, which is an additional school just to learn Mandarin. And I was adamant at 5 years old that I was not going to go. And I asked my dad now, like, how could you not make a 5-year-old do something? He's, have you met you? I was
Yes.
very clear at 5 that I did not want to learn Chinese because I did not want to be Chinese. So that's when I first started having these internal identity issues and internal shame and a dislike of myself and embarrassment around being Chinese
At 5.
at 5. And it escalated and grew as I got older in grammar school, feeling different. There wasn't a lot of Asian kids in my area or in the school. And so it just added to that. And I just wanted to be the part of the popular crew, which, funny enough, I ended up being best friends with a popular girl. And because of that, I was not completely separated, but I always felt it. I always felt it. And some people would make fun of me, like people would help say ching chong, or like all kinds of ways that kids act to make you feel other.
Or to
And
make themselves feel somehow artificially elevated.
absolutely, absolutely. And I took it in very deeply. I internalized it
Yeah.
to the core, especially because I already had that wounding already living inside of me. But yeah, even though I was like down with the popular crew, I really wasn't. I really wasn't. I was always, quote unquote, an outsider.
So in those early years, what kind of things did you do to try to fit in?
Oh, I would try to pre 13, like pre high school, like in grammar school, I was just like quiet, and I just find a way to contort myself
Mm.
to be like everyone else, to be likable. I learned how to be likable. But once I entered into high school, it wasn't that wanting to be likable went away. That was always there. But I also had these other things that I used to try to fit in, try to dress a certain way, like try to dress quote unquote cool, try to be friends with the cool girls, try to act like I didn't care, even though I was so sensitive inside. I even remember like changing my walk. This is also partly because of my trauma. I had multiple sexual traumas starting at 13 years old. So it was a combination of that and this foundational piece of feeling like an outsider, where I just created this armor essentially. I guess I'll backtrack a little bit in that my parents got divorced right before I went to high school. And that was my first major trauma, I would say, like trauma. My brother got kicked out at that time. So literally, I went from being like the hub of the family, because I was like the baby. My dad cried when I was born. Like I was the first girl in the family on his side. And so there was a lot of spoiling. I was like loved so deeply. And I felt like I was the core that held, like the glue that held the family together. And nobody said that, but that's how I felt. And then my family broke apart out of nowhere, and they didn't really communicate very well. Old school Chinese family, they're definitely more liberal than a lot of Chinese parents, but they didn't communicate very well about the whole divorce. And my whole world just shattered. I went from this safe home space where my brother's there. He's like my best friend. I look up to him, and he's gone. My parents are separated. I don't know what the fuck is going on. And I started acting out because of that. And I started hanging out in all the wrong places. I was very naive, but on the outside, I appeared to be like tough. So it was like this internal, external difference. And I try to pretend to myself that I was tough too. I try to act like convince myself that I was okay when I wasn't okay. Really, I was just numb and didn't know that I needed help. I didn't know. I had no idea. So I started looking for love in all the wrong places, and whether it was like girls that I wanted to hang out with because they were popular, but they were like party girls, or hanging out with men that were giving me attention, or teenage boys that were giving me attention. And that's when the first sexual trauma happened. And I tried to commit suicide not long after that. So at 13 years old, that's when that happened. And so between 13 and 16, there were multiple situations of sexual trauma. So that also added to this whole pattern of hiding
Mm.
and creating barriers and walls and layers of protection, just like defense mechanisms. And some were really tricky and sneaky. Like I walked a certain way to look like I was confident and strong and like unfuckable with. I wanted to show this image that you can't fuck with me. I'm tough. But really, I was not tough at all, like at all. There was all these ways that I tried to appear other than what I was, because I was scared. I was terrified and felt really alone. As a result, I started like drinking a lot. Started drinking at 13. My first drink was Bacardi 151 out the bottle. Like I was out of control, self-destructive. And it got even worse when I got my driver's license and bought a car, and at 16. And I started working young, like when I was like 13. So I saved about $8,000 by the time I was 16 years old. So I had this dual life
Yeah.
of being really responsible in certain ways, and like really good with my money and showing up for work, and really good at my job at this bakery where I was like just selling baked goods as a cashier. And at the same time, like completely out of control. So it was like there was like very controlled aspects and then completely out of control aspects. And then added to that, I have this money. And so I just started buying my own stuff. I bought a beeper. Like I had my own phone line in my bedroom. My mom couldn't control me. She didn't know how to contain me. And I was so full of rage
Mm.
about everything that she was scared of me. I was a, a very intense girl. And so there was just a lot of self-hatred and shame and depression and anxiety happening, but nobody knew what to do. And when I tried to commit suicide, I didn't really want to die. It was just a cry for help. When I looked back, I was like, oh, I didn't really want to die. I just didn't know what else to do. I felt so alone. I felt like my parents didn't know what I needed. I just felt invisible in a lot of ways. And this is coming from an upbringing of knowing that they loved me, right? But there was a way that they didn't know how to communicate in the ways that I needed communication when I was starting to struggle. That was when it kind of went to the shitter. And I had to be put into one of those homes for troubled teens. I literally had to sleep there because they were afraid that I was going to try to kill myself again. And I had to convince the therapist that I wasn't going to do it again. And I knew I wasn't. I was clear. I wasn't just saying that just to get out. I knew I did not want to die. Also, especially because I saw my dad cry for the first time when I was in the hospital. And I just saw the impact that it made on those that loved me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just, I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. That's not what I want to do. And I want to live, but I just didn't know how to get the help I needed. So I convinced the therapist, and she believed me. She's like, you need to start doing therapy and family therapy, individual and family. And that was good in a sense because it opened up conversation, but not enough for what I needed at that time. But at the same time, it was perfect because I really believe that our lives are perfect as they unfold. All of it, all of it. So yeah, it was just many years of a lot of suffering, a
In
lot
your
of
teens,
suffering.
mostly in your teens.
It led into my 20s, but I would say the teens were the most scary
Mm,
because I felt the most alone and I didn't know what to do. Like I didn't even know I was raped. I didn't know what had happened was not my fault.
mm,
And so that took years for me to even realize. And so I was suffering and acting out because of these traumas, in addition to divorce and family splitting up. But I didn't know why. I didn't know why I was acting the way I was. I didn't know why I was so angry. I didn't have the awareness of where this was coming from. I just felt like I was going crazy. And just in line with the whole duality of my life, of how I was like really out of control but also really responsible in a lot of ways.
yeah.
Same thing was with my dad. My dad was my spiritual teacher starting at 11 or 12. Like we talk about the laws of the universe and energy and things like that. Also, side note, my mom got remarried to a grandmaster of martial arts, and his name, we called him Shifu, which is grandmaster. That's what you, in Chinese culture, you don't call people by their names if they're your elders. You call them by their title, like auntie or mom. Like even my brother, I don't call him by his name. I call him Goga, which means brother, older brother. There's Didi, which is younger brother. So there's all kinds in the language,
Yeah.
is a set level of respect. And so I would call my stepfather Shifu. So he was also a Chinese herbalist, so grandmaster of martial arts, kung fu, tai chi, qigong, and I would observe him doing energy work like qigong. And one time I saw him push his students with his energy without touching them while their eyes were closed. So there was this whole upbringing with my dad talking about energy and universe, me observing my stepfather working with energy, being raised with Chinese herbs. We didn't take prescription medication. It was very much a holistic lifestyle, a very traditional Chinese medicine lifestyle. And so I was having all this awareness around spirituality because I got the philosophy. I understood the depth of the things that my dad would teach me, but I was still in emotional turmoil. So I didn't know how to integrate it into my life
Mhm.
as a young person. I didn't know. So it was like this duality of being like out of control again and so emotional and acting out, but then also having this deep connection with spirit and energy.
That's interesting. I have read about people who are very spiritually aware at a young age who will have those types of psychological reactions. And that's actually not uncommon for that to happen. I don't know if you have heard that, but
No,
it's,
I haven't, but I'm not surprised.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not surprised because also, this is just my own belief that a lot of people who have been through a lot of pain or trauma and suffering, like, are put into an initiation. That's how I saw it for me. This path was laid for me to be who I am now. And I trust that. And that's why I'm able to hold space for such deep work in the shadow. I
Hmm.
would consider myself a shadow worker and a light worker. In order to be a shadow worker, you need to be a light worker. And so my own healing process has been the reason why I'm able to do the work I do. But I actually have a memory, like when I was a kid, I would pretend playing only a few things, witch, I would play witch. I'd create a cauldron, which was a pot, and put water and dirt and leaves and stuff like that and make my witch's brew. Or I would play businesswoman. So I always knew I wanted to be my own boss. And I also played, it wasn't really playing, but would, I laid my hands on my mom, like around 8 years old, like doing energy work. I didn't know what I was doing. It was just an instinct. And so I've always been connected to this healer and mystic, always. Even in my teens, I started studying things having to do with the occult, like tarot, astrology. Even in the midst of all my acting out and craziness in high school, I had the wherewithal to find like an adult learning center, the Cambridge Adult Learning Center. And I started taking courses there, learning about psychic abilities and reading all these things. And like I said, it's like there's a lot of opposite ends,
Yeah.
double sides of the coin that I lived all at the same time.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. You're developing the intellectual side and the spiritual side, plus just the personal exploration, this whole like
Yeah.
self-discovery thing.
It was very painful because I ended up drinking a lot. I was like using alcohol and weed to numb. As a result of drinking, like binge drinking in my 20s, I would find myself in very dangerous situations. It was full of disconnection and sexual experiences, like waking up, blacking out, waking up next to somebody, had sex with someone, or in college, I woke up like under a tunnel after waking up from a blackout, or it wasn't a ton of blackouts, but enough where I'm like, wow, I'm very blessed because I could have died. Like something really bad could have happened to me.
This continued into your 20s through college.
Yep. And even, my whole 20s was a hot mess. Like I was a hot mess. Like it was such a painful time of like confusion. I would laugh a lot. I've always been somebody who laughed a lot. So again, there was this dual aspects of me. So joyful in certain ways, but really in deep suffering on the inside. So I would get high a lot. It was like that was my favorite. It was like smoking weed and numbing out and checking out and not wanting to feel what lived in my body. That's why this is like what I teach now,
Mhm.
partly this embodiment work, this somatic healing, because I was so disassociated from my body, completely checked out of what was happening in here.
Yeah. And so what were you so confused about at that time, early 20s?
I think just I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I always felt that I had a purpose. I always had this connection of know that I'm here for a reason, but I didn't know what it was. So that was one confusion. Also, I think just the confusion of like, why am I not happy? Why am I so depressed? Like, really depressed. And why can't I stop being depressed? And just not understanding why I felt so bad all the time.
Were you still struggling with the identity issues?
Yeah, so it's interesting because in high school, I gave myself a name, Stephanie,
Oh,
because I didn't want my name. My name to me symbolized everything I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be Chinese. I didn't want to appear Chinese. I didn't want to talk like I was Chinese. Like I wanted to do anything possible to be the opposite. And so I changed my name to Stephanie, not legally. And I would go to the teacher at the beginning of the school year and say, "Can you just call me Stephanie when we do attendance?" It was just like creating a whole world, an identity to make me feel safe, essentially. And it didn't work. I didn't feel safe. I gained a lot of weight after my first rape. That was part of another subconscious way how I protected myself. I protected myself by putting all this padding and dressing more baggy like a boy, and walking tough. Like all these ways were for me to hide, and it was like my invisibility cloak. And then in college, I changed my name again to China with a Y, Chyna. I think I was trying to be like, I'm good with being Chinese, just trying to, I don't know, reclaim it, but in a way that was really wonky. So just from that, the fact that I changed my name 2 times is clear that my identity issues were so intense. But then I went to China when I was 25 for the first time as an adult.
Okay.
And I went with my dad. And it was such a beautiful experience because it was the first time I'd been around people that just looked like me, except from when I was 2, but I didn't remember all of that. But I looked around at 25 years old and I'm like, oh my God, everybody here is Chinese. This is so weird. Like
Everybody's Chinese. That would
everybody's Chinese. It's harder for some people to understand, especially if you're white or whatever culture that may have a lot of, wasn't raised in Chinatown.
I
So
can feel that. I can feel how that I don't know, but I have empathy for that feeling.
yeah. And so when I was there, I was just like, oh my God, it really impacted me on a visceral level. And even though there was like some grossness, they spit a lot or they bump you, and their personal space was not like Americans, I still fell in love with them. There was something about really seeing them and the history and the culture and really feeling, oh my God, I love these people. Like this group of people. Not, I don't even know you, but I love you. I just felt that. And as a result of me loving them, I started to love myself. I would say that would be the first moment where I felt an inkling of self-love in regards to my identity, because how could I love them and then it not come back internally? That's what happened. And so when I returned back to the States after that trip, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have people call me by my name. But I wasn't ready to introduce my whole first name, which is Po Hung. I was like, you can call me Po. So I was even working at that time as in the financial industry.
Mm.
I started out as a bartender, then I got a job as a mortgage broker, then I got a job as a banker, and then I got a job as support in a stock brokerage company. So I got my stock broker's license.
Okay.
But I even had them call me China. So even in like corporate America, I was having people call me by this name. And so when I returned from China, I was like, it's call me Po. And so that was a major moment for me of reclamation.
Yeah.
Major.
Do you think your father was that the purpose of taking the trip?
We just wanted to connect, and I knew I wanted to connect with my people more. So, yeah, my dad doesn't think like that. He
Okay.
doesn't do things with an intention. He's very much surrendered to the flow of life. Yeah, no, but it was beautiful and perfect. And I honestly don't know what would have happened if I didn't go on that trip. It would have been a completely different story. My name, and I think names are very important for many people, and especially in certain cultures. And my name, Po Hung, means big red. And my dad named me this for a reason, because red in Chinese culture symbolizes love and power. And so I can see how my journey has been really about coming back to embodying the truth of my name. And for me to own my name and say, this is me, has been such a beautiful journey. Such a beautiful journey. I think a lot of people could probably relate to that because our names mean something. On an energetic level, there's a connection to something bigger, and
Mhm.
then also to what your name means. I don't think that's for everybody, but I think a lot of people can connect to that.
I agree. You were named. We are named. I guess we can choose our names, but even you tried to do that. You tried to choose your name and it didn't work because you were already named.
Yeah, I think there are some people out there that like rename themselves and it's true for them. But for me, it was absolutely not. It was just part of my journey of like really trying to find myself in all these other places. I was looking externally for everything when the answer was always inside of me, as cliche and corny as that may sound, but it's true. And I needed to go through a lot of suffering in order to get to that place, which didn't
So
happen until much later.
it was very tumultuous up until that time. So then at 25, after you had this experience, did it start to calm for you?
No, not yet.
Okay, what happened next?
I was working in that financial industry and I was studying for my stockbroker's license and I passed it. And I was so miserable because I felt like a caged animal. I was like, I do not belong in corporate America. I always knew, like I said, that I wanted to work for myself. I hated playing Barbies when I was little. I didn't like playing that stuff. I liked to play businesswoman. So I'm like, this is not working for me. So I was praying to be let go from this job. And when I got back from a trip to Greece with friends, I was laid off. It was a prayer answered, and they gave me severance. And it was that moment when, not that I started finding joy, but started a door opened into this next chapter for me. But I was still a hot mess. Like I was still drinking a lot. I wasn't the drinker where like I could have alcohol in my house and not even look at it. It was when I would socially drink, then I would just drink way too much than I thought I could handle. Then I'd just get really drunk. I started a business because I was laid off. I was like, oh, what can I do to make money under the table and still get unemployment? That was my thinking. And then I had this download saying, oh, start dog walking. And this is way before there was a big industry around pet sitting or anything having to do with the pet industry. This is 20 years ago. So I started a dog walking business. That was my first business. It felt amazing to be independent and free. And it was so easy for me to be a businesswoman. It was just like in my blood. And I was already good with money and things like that, but I was still suffering as I was going through the growth of my business. Actually, there was a point when I lost around $30,000 in online gambling in
Wow.
my in around that time. And it was a very pivotal moment for me because I had to really look at myself and be like, what are you doing? Symbolically was on the ground. Like literally, it was a bottom. It was a bottom. And I've had many bottoms at that point, as you can imagine, but there was something about the money part that was very awakening for me. And so I was scared. I was scared. And I just kind of felt like I was in a dark tunnel. I always tell this story because I literally felt like I was in a dark tunnel. Like it was just dark. I didn't know what to do. And I was like laid out on the floor, but I saw a light at the end of the tunnel. It was like just a little tiny spark. It wasn't even bright, but that was a thing that I focused my mind and my attention on. I was like, okay, I'm really in pain right now. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this hole. I'm really scared, but I'm going to just focus on this light. I know there was something inside of me, like my connection to source or like my upbringing with the teachings, spiritual teachings with my dad. I don't know, but there was something in me that was like, you're not going to give up, Poe.
Mm.
You're not going to give up. This is not this is not how it ends. There was a fire in me. I've always had the fire, this like desire, this burning desire to be in purpose and be happy and joyful. And so I was just like, you know what? If I need to just like crawl, I'm going to crawl. I'm just going to crawl towards that light. So that's what I did. I would just little by little crawl towards that light, taking care of myself or whatever it was. And then eventually I was able to stand up and then walk. And then eventually that momentum started picking up. And then eventually I got to the light. And the light to me symbolized true joy. Because even though I was like boisterous and laughing and like loud and all these things and seemed fine, inside, like I said, I was miserable. So I just wanted to feel inside of myself, can I be happy? I thought I was going to die unhappy. I thought my whole life was going to be depression. I thought my whole life was going to be this way. So I was like, okay, what if I can believe that it could be different than what it is if I just keep moving forward just a little bit at a time? I don't know where it just came from, but it came, and I'm so grateful for that because, and that's why I'm saying, like, I believe everything happens for a reason. Me losing all that money was a huge wake-up call for me. That didn't mean that I didn't still have pain and misery for many years. It took years for me to get to a place of happiness, but there was still a lot of suffering. My mom died suddenly a couple of years after that gambling experience. So I was still heavily drinking and smoking, even with this light. I was still going through my acting out, but I was literally little baby steps at a time.
Yeah. And would you say this continued into your 30s?
Yeah, it did, because it might have been different if my mom didn't died. But
Yeah.
my mom, actually, I was in Miami when my mom passed away. She had a brain aneurysm when I was on vacation in Miami. And I immediately flew to where she was in DC, and she was connected to life support. She was brain dead immediately. So she was dead. But it was such a shock to my system. And I didn't know how to feel the grief. And I was numbing a lot with smoking and drinking. And that happened for years. I tell my acupuncture patients sometimes, actually, because like if they're PMSing is a whole nother conversation, but the beautiful part of PMSing is that it can bring up emotions that you are numbing. So for me, every month I would grieve my mom because I was PMSing. If it wasn't for that, I would have been even more numb. I would have been even more contained with my feelings around that.
How old were you when your mom passed?
She passed a couple of months before my 30th birthday.
Wow, that's so young.
We were supposed to actually gather for my birthday, my whole family, which was unusual because everybody was apart. And that gathering never happened because of that. So it was really scary because I never knew how I'd handle my mom's death. I was so afraid of her dying because we were so close. I have an ability, an intuitive ability sometimes to know that when someone's going to die ahead of time.
Oh,
And so I knew my mom was going to die young. So I made sure to have certain conversations with her, healing conversations, talking about certain things, dealing with certain things that needed to be talked about. I wanted to make sure that all happened before she passed. And so I'm so grateful that I made sure of that because of this intuitive sense.
wow. How early did you have the realization that she was gonna die early?
I would say, I don't remember exactly, but I would say in my 20s at some point, like I just had this feeling and
Mm.
it kept on coming back. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to ignore this. So even in the midst, again, of my suffering and like acting out, I was deeply in tuned with my intuition. I talked about the occult in my teens. I always knew that I had psychic abilities. I always knew that I was intuitive. I always knew all these things. I was just lost. At this moment in my 20s, I was like, okay, I keep on hearing this thing about my mom. So I'm just going to act on it. I'm going to just do that. I'm just going to talk to her just in case. So I don't have any regrets around that.
That's a blessing.
Yeah, it's such a blessing. And I was, like I said, I was numbing a lot for a couple of years, and things really started shifting for me when I went to acupuncture school. That's
Okay.
when I would say the next shift happened. I didn't know I wanted to be an acupuncturist. I was walking dogs, I had my pet sitting company, I was successful, things were going great. But I also knew that this was not my life, that it was a stepping stone. And I was like, okay, I want to do some healing work. I want to work with people one on one. So I knew there was a certain list that I created of what I wanted in my job. I want to work for myself, but I didn't know what it was. And one day I was meditating, and I was probably like 32, somewhere around there. And literally the word acupuncture enters my mind out of nowhere. And I was like, immediately, I knew that was it. That was my next path, was to become an acupuncturist. And the funny thing is, I never had a good acupuncture experience. I got acupuncture like 2 times in Chinatown, and I didn't enjoy it, and I didn't feel like it really made a difference. So it wasn't like I had an experience that was like, oh, it really changed my life. No, it was just this word and a feeling. And so I started acupuncture school literally a couple months later, like it all lined up. And I was living in Philly at this time, and the school was in New York. And they literally had a program starting in January, and it was the first time that they had done that. So I didn't have to wait a whole year. I was like ready to do this thing. So the fact that it was like ready to go, I was like, oh my God, this is meant to be. So I started commuting to New York 3 to 4 times a week for a couple of years for acupuncture school. And I just started learning so much and working with people, the energetic system, the Chinese medicine system, but also supporting other people in their healing impacted me incredibly. And so when I became an acupuncturist, I was a licensed acupuncturist in New York because I ended up moving to New York. That really was foundational work for me, using the practice of being a healer and acupuncturist as a reflection for my own things that I need to heal. Because that's the beautiful part with working with people in any way, even just strangers. But I was in such intimate experiences with my patients that I could see my own reflection, or I could see how I was off. I would recommend meditation to them, but I wasn't meditating. So there was these ways that I had to call myself out and step up because of the work that I was doing. And
Yeah.
so I just started like that was really the opening of a path for me.
Then that was the whole period from your early 30s until when?
Yeah, so I've been an acupuncturist since then. I guess the next major moment after that was my ayahuasca journeys
Okay.
in 2013. And so I had been practicing for a couple of years now because I got licensed in 2011. And I went to Costa Rica. I didn't even know what ayahuasca was. My friend was going there to support the retreat center. And I was like, what is she doing? And she's, you're not ready yet. And I was like, okay. And then one day she's, you're ready. I think you should come to Costa Rica with me to do this ayahuasca ceremony. I was like, okay. I said yes without even knowing what it was. Like, this is again in 2013, before it's popular.
Yeah.
And I didn't even Google it. So I went, and it was this whole wow experience, like 2 week journey. That was in January 2013. And my intention was to heal my wound with my mom.
Hmm.
And I had a very mystical, powerful experience with that. But then I went back again in July of that year, and my intention for that experience was to heal around my sex and my wounds. And that's what happened. I didn't have visions like a lot of people do. A lot of the times when I do plant medicine, and I'm also a plant medicine facilitator, it's a somatic experience for me. And so what happened for me was the day after the journey, ayahuasca, I was taking a nap, and I had a wet dream, honestly. And it's not something that was really common for me. Maybe it happened one time before that, I don't know. But I was having this dream where I was in a community house that had a lot of sexual energy. And when I woke up from that dream, I knew I had to go to this festival called Mish Fest, where my friend kept on inviting me to. And I was like, no, I don't want to go. It's a couple months away. I just kept on saying no. But when I woke up from this dream, I had this clear knowing that I needed to be there. And so I went a couple months later, and I was hanging out with some women, and this woman comes up to us, and there's a program starting in 15 minutes called Orgasmic Meditation. Anybody want to go? And I immediately said yes. And in that workshop, I was just blown away by this practice that they had described. I don't know who your audience is, and this may be like weird or radical to some people, but I'm a radical person.
No, do it. Say it.
Okay, but like basically the practice is there's a stroker and a strokee. And so there's a stroker stroking your clitoris in the upper left-hand quadrant for 15 minutes. And it's done a very specific way every single time. And it's a meditation practice. It's not about orgasming. It's about feeling the energy moving in your body and also connecting with somebody else's energy, and also practicing communication, because there's a whole process around it. But I didn't do it in that day. But when they were talking about it, they were talking about how this helps you to let go of control and open to receiving and surrendering. And I knew in my head this whole time I was a control freak, like absolute control freak, scared of everything, even though I didn't appear like it on the outside, because I had really mastered this inside outside experience. And I wanted to be free with my sex more. I wanted to be open to having intimate experiences instead of getting drunk and like having sex with somebody because I was uncomfortable in my own body or uncomfortable with vulnerability and intimacy. I knew I needed something. And so when I heard it, I was like, yes. And when I came back to Brooklyn, I Googled them and I signed up for their 10-month coaching program without even trying the practice, doing their intro class. And the program was in San Francisco. So I had to travel from New York to San Francisco once a month for 10 months. That's kind of how I live my life. When I know something, I get that hit, I feel it in my body, I go for it. That's how I moved to New York. I never wanted to live in New York. But my ex-boss at that time, because I had worked for a short period for somebody, and I said, I'll work for you for 2 years max, because I don't know what I'm going to be doing after I graduate from acupuncture school. And once I was about to graduate, he said, why don't you just move to New York? And I was like, oh yeah, like my whole body said yes. And I moved to New York right away, even though in my mind I was like a no to New York. So I have a practice, or without even trying to be a practice, but just knowing when my life is guiding me somewhere. And so some people might see that as impulsive. I don't. I just see it as me listening to the energy, feeling the energy and responding, because I trust that knowing. And so that happened with this program. I just immediately did that. So yeah, orgasmic meditation changed my life. The company, I don't want to go deep into all of that. There was a lot of incongruency, let's say, that I felt like there was things off with the way they were running things, but the practice in itself was the thing that I deeply appreciated. Not only the practice, but the philosophy around the practice. It was the first time that I was in my body,
Mm.
because they taught about feeling the sensations in your body being with what is like your turn on. I never learned these things before. This was my entry point into self development or healing outside of acupuncture. And so I had this whole education around energetics in a whole new way, and orgasm energy and cycles and things like that. And so it really supported me in the healing of my trauma, the trauma that lived in my body from these sexual experiences. So I'm so grateful for that.
How old were you at that point then when you
That
finally got in touch with healing some of those deeper traumas, the sexual related traumas? You seem to be really coming into a different phase of your identity, or a more, maybe a more like authentic phase of your identity.
Yeah, more so because in these programs that I took with this company, I learned about communication as well, and being honest with myself and honest with other people,
Mm.
and boundaries and all these things that I didn't know before. So yes, I was like really coming, it was coming together, like the fractured parts of me were starting to be healed, and so I was becoming more one with
Mm.
myself. Still like off. There was still things that I was healing and moving through, even though at that point, when I talked about earlier, when the light at the end of the tunnel,
Yeah.
it was before that time, before the ayahuasca, where I had this moment. I don't remember exactly when or where, but I remember feeling, oh my God, I actually feel really like happy inside. Not this laughter, not necessarily something that seemed happy, but I felt happy. So that was huge for me. But then it wasn't like I was happy all the time. It was just like this moment of, oh
You
my
knew it.
gosh.
You knew
Yeah.
it.
It's like, I can have this. It was that kind of moment. Like, I feel it now, and I know that there's more possible.
There.
Yeah. Yeah, it was such a confirmation
Mm.
of my understanding when I was in my 20s, when I had set that intention. Oh, okay, I did it. I arrived to a place that I had set an intention for. I can do it. I had the power. I did it. And what else can I do? And yeah, that was major. I would say at that time around the trauma healing, the more internal body somatic work was, yeah, started 2013. So yeah, 10 years ago. I mean, this year is literally a major closing of a cycle, 10-year cycle for me,
Okay.
because that ayahuasca experience and was, it literally was a portal. A whole portal opened for me, and was like, okay, you're stepping into deep shadow work, like true healing. Because before that, it was, I was kind of like tiptoeing. I didn't really, because I didn't have the guidance. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know any of that, even though I had been to therapy. But it was really the somatic work. And this is why I do a lot of somatic work in my own business for my clients, is because I know from my own experience that you can't just heal in your mind. It has to be a holistic experience. It has to be a mind, body, spirit, energy experience to really expand. So that was major for me.
And is that the time when you started to hone this practice, like form it into a business with using that somatic approach?
No, not yet. I was still deep in my own practice and expanding in my intimacy, in my sex, my sensuality. Yeah, I was very much in student mode, let's
Okay.
say. And it's still expanding a lot, but just like learning, just like a sponge for
Mhm.
information and also experiences. Because, like I said, a lot of the experiences I had before were very much like drinking and sexual experiences because of that, because I
Mhm.
was uncomfortable in my body. And now I'm in a community full of people who are practicing being in their bodies and doing quote unquote sex research. I would do research about receiving or having boundaries, and I would just explore these different topics and how they related to me. And so I was just in this mode of like experimentation at this time. I would
Okay.
call this my hoe phase. But a conscious hoe phase.
That's so funny. How long did the hoe phase last?
I would say a couple of years. Yeah, a couple of years. There was different periods of wholeness, but it was more like in this container, I would say, because there was like all these programs I was taking with these people. There was like a built-in community that I could practice with. That was for a couple of years. And then after, when I left, because it just, like I said, it was incongruent, things felt off. And I just was then practicing on my own. And there was still a lot of messiness there. So it was a very messy process. And that's why I talk a lot about this with the women I work with. It gets messy first before, like when you're doing this kind of work, you got to be okay with being messy. So it was very messy for me. I've been through the whole thing of shadow work and shame, and like all those things had to come up for me.
So what does that look like, doing the shadow work?
It's different for everybody. It could be inner child work. There's so many different tools and techniques, but I would say the undercurrent, the root of it all is allowing oneself to be present enough and create enough space in their life and within to feel the parts of them that have been locked up, hiding. That's why I do work with a lot of inner child, do a lot of inner child work, is because there's so much there that has been stored away. And so shadow work is really just like somatic work. It just is shining the light on areas that need illumination, that need love. It's just putting love someplace where there's darkness.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So it's not like dwelling in the past.
No, absolutely not. And that's the opposite of what I would recommend,
Mhm.
because I noticed that there is a tendency to do that. Because I did that for myself. It's interesting. This is a great conversation because in my own process, I thought I was doing the work for a long time in my 20s. Even though I was a hot mess, I was still very conscious. Like even in me drinking and acting out, I still had a level of awareness, and I was trying my best to do the work. I thought I was because I was emotional,
Mm.
but emotional doesn't necessarily mean you're doing the work, because I was more swampy. I was ruminating. I
Yeah.
was feeling, it was my ego. It was my trauma. It wasn't me actually holding space
Mm.
for the healing. It was
Yeah.
more me not knowing how to deal with it, and it would just spill out in all these ways.
Yeah. I think about that a lot. The difference between how you can reckon with things that have caused you trauma at whatever level versus ruminating on them. This just came to me this morning, this phrase. I thought you have to think about how to live gently with something. Letting go of something doesn't mean you're going to forget about it. It's not going to go away. It doesn't disappear. You have to learn to live gently with it.
I love that.
Yeah. I think that's when we think about bad experiences or things that have caused us pain in the past, and we think about living in the present moment, being the present, being the now, let it go, release it. But it's really not that simple. And what is the difference between, how do you work with it in order to send it love, knowing that it's going to be a part of you forever, but yet at the same time be able to, at some level, I don't know if I like the terms release or let it go, because it's not going to go. It doesn't go. I don't know. I have to like noodle on that, but I feel like that's an interesting thing to think about. And I love the shadow work idea. I know Carl Jung talks about that a lot, and
Yeah.
it's very interesting.
I wrote a post actually a couple of days ago on Instagram talking about we don't need to look for trauma to heal. I think a lot of times people are in this process where I was, because I understand this pattern of trying to fix ourselves or seeing
Mhm.
ourselves as a project and like
Yeah.
hunting down a trauma to heal. And
Right.
so,
You're
no,
broken.
it's not about that, because the trauma is going to come up on its own. You don't have to search for it, because when you just allow yourself to be in everyday life and you're activated, that's already something that's bringing up a piece that you can start to work on.
Yeah. It's a clue. Yeah, I think of it as a clue. Those experiences are trying to teach you something ultimately, and they're just clues about where you need to go to process things.
Yeah, and the way I process a lot of times is like through the body, because that's such a part of healing that I think a lot of people avoid because it's so scary.
They
Now,
don't associate that if they're having a physical symptom, it's connected to holistically to maybe other experiences in their life or
yeah,
the
totally.
mind body kind of stuff that it's really interesting because it does catch up with you, especially as you age. It will catch up with you
And
physically.
also the sensations. My work is very nuanced in this way, in the subtleties, because the sensations hold memories,
Mhm.
and these sensations can guide you into the healing places. That's how I do the inner child work, is
Mhm.
because every day, if you're having an activation and you're feeling all this sensation in your body, are you actually bringing presence and feeling the sensation? Or are you trying to disconnect and not feel it? This is what I mean by a lot of people are afraid to do the body work, is because they're afraid to feel what lives in their body.
They try to push it away. Or I love when people say, I'm going to fight it. And the first time I learned about not fighting things, but rather loving them was Louise Hay, because she would talk about you have to send that area of your body love. If you had a pain in your abdomen, you could think, I'm going to fight this off. I'm going to tough it out. Words like that rather than sending it love. Because if it was a little baby and you had a little baby who was in pain, you wouldn't say to the little baby, like, all right, tough it out. You would love
Totally.
and nurture the little baby. So I think of physical sensations like that, sending them love. And so I really resonate with the work that you're doing. So just tell us then, the last 10 years, you were still embroiled in the personal work for a good part of that. How did you shift into more of a healing phase that now has transitioned into the work that you're doing with others?
Yeah, so it's been a progression, because I've been working in healing since 2011 with people. And so I've always had this foundation of holding space and guiding people. Even as an acupuncturist, I still was a spiritual guide. I think it's been so many layers and steps along the way. After that experience with orgasmic meditation, then I went into another program that helped connect with sisterhood
Mm.
and pleasure. And so that was another major opening for me, and learned how to move emotions through my body, like punching and screaming. I didn't do that before on a conscious level. Okay, I'm feeling angry right now. Let me just like move to this music or something like that. So that was major. So things started really opening up then, and so everything that I was doing on a personal level was being infused into the work that I was doing with my patients and my clients.
But at the
And
same time, you had to be making money, so you're still doing your work.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's how I see it. It's like an ever evolving evolution of myself, like I said
Yeah.
in the beginning.
Your
And
education.
yeah, and it's pouring out into my people that I'm working with. But I would say then the next tier after that would be like a couple of years ago, when I closed my acupuncture practice in New York.
Okay.
So I moved here to Miami because I had a fire. I already knew. So before pandemic happened, I had already been feeling I'm finished with doing acupuncture full time, and I'm going to take a sabbatical around the world. And then the pandemic happened, and I was like, okay, that's not happening. And then I shut down my acupuncture practice, and I was like, okay, what do I want to do now? I already could feel a shift happening. What is it that I want to do? And so I started another business, this business. And that's really when it was birthed, was in the pandemic, I would say. It was happening before that, but I would say when I would like really solidify, this is what I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love your fearlessness in reinventing yourself.
Thank you for that. That's something I've noticed that pattern as well, like constantly. I have many planets in Scorpio. My sun sign is a Scorpio. And so I don't know if you know about astrology, but
A
it's
lot.
all about death and rebirth.
Okay.
So I'm in a constant cycle of death and rebirth.
I love that. I
Over
think
and
we all
over.
are. In fact, I had to come up with a word. It was an exercise I did to come up with a word for the new year, and my word is rebirth.
We're all going through this cycle, some
All the time.
faster and some slower, some bigger, some smaller. But that's
Embrace it.
why, yeah,
You make it shine. It's like that speck of light that you're always moving toward.
absolutely. I listen. For me, it's all about the surrendering to life, surrendering to the flow. And a lot of the foundation that I work with is Taoism, which is yin and yang, the feminine and masculine energy. And so I'm always listening to life. What is this next thing that's calling? Like really trusting it. And yeah, a lot of every time it's always an unknown. There's a mystery. It's like I have no idea how it's going to happen, but I trust the call.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened in 2020. And like I said, a little before that, I was like, okay, I'm going to exit out of acupuncture and create this other business. When I had a fire in August of 2020, I was like, okay, I'm going to leave New York because I already wanted to leave New York.
Okay.
And I planned on doing a cross country trip. And Miami was my first stop, and I never left.
So funny.
So I like that's a perfect way to sum up my life in a way. It's okay, I had a fire. It's like Phoenix rising. It was the doorway into this next chapter in my life. And it has been such a blessing to be in Miami. I love it here. I never would have moved here. I never wanted to live in Florida. So just like I never want to live in New York. Like none of these things are things that I thought I wanted. I didn't want to be an acupuncturist. I just was listening to the intuition and just that's it. That's where the reinvention keeps happening. It's because I just keep on following it.
I'm listening. You're really in tune with yourself in a way that a lot of people aren't. And it leads you to a lot of magical things.
Yes, that is so true. There was always something in me, even in the midst of the darkness and confusion. There was still this part of me, which I know is not just me, everybody has it. I would pay attention to it and do inquiry.
Yeah.
What is this I'm feeling? What am I hearing? What is this?
That's right there, the difference. That's the key to doing the shadow work is it's inquiry. It's not rumination.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
you look at it from a point of like a metacognition, like a analysis almost, as opposed to getting like emotionally stuck.
I never heard that term before.
Yeah. Thinking about your thinking is metacognition.
Okay, consciousness.
Basically.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah, and that's what my dad has taught me all along. My dad has been my spiritual teacher since the beginning, and he has held space for me all these years. He's 91 now, and
Aw.
he's still like the teachings, like his transmissions of because he's a Taoist spiritual teacher.
Yeah.
So he just has downloaded all of this energetic transmission around love and yin energy and surrender and just all this wisdom. And I feel so blessed that I have that living in my body so that I can also share it with other people because really the resistance to being with what is, whether it's an emotion, because that's how I see the difference between pain and suffering. Like
Mm.
we need to feel what we feel, but we don't need to ruminate on it. It's the
Yep.
difference. So he would just remind me over and over to just embrace what is, embrace what is. And it was just such a reminder of compassion. Like, how can I be kind to myself? How can I really love myself here? How can I accept what's happening right now? And in that surrender, then things would naturally transform and alchemize and
Yeah,
these cycles would happen.
that's interesting. So have you come home to yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm on the other side. I believe that I'm always going to be a student and a beginner. Like I arrive somewhere and then you begin again. So it's just like a constant cycle. But I can absolutely say that I have gotten to the other side. I am like my life. If I look back, if I went to my like child, me as an inner child or as a teen or in my 20s, be like, this is how your life is going to be, I wouldn't have believed it. But like the peace, I didn't know that I could have so much peace in my body. That I didn't know I could have this life. And I'm not talking about external because I've always been a hard, independent woman who is successful. You can have all those things. It doesn't mean anything on the inside. I didn't care. Like all I really wanted was to feel good on the inside. And I can actually say that I do now. And I'm so grateful for that.
What would you say to that teenager that was suffering so much?
It's not your fault.
Mm,
You are worthy. You are loved. Yeah. I would just keep affirming her and her worthiness and her value because a common thought that would spin in my head in my teens and even into my 20s was you're a disposable piece of meat. You're a
wow.
disposable piece of trash. This is the foundation, a core belief that I have in my body, just piece of trash because of those rapes. And literally, not to be too graphic, but there was a moment that I remember waking up out of a blackout during one of the experiences, and these guys were carrying my body down the hallway naked. It was like I was a piece of meat, just like I didn't matter. And so I would tell myself that you matter. And yeah, I would just keep loving on her.
Yeah. Yes. You talked a little bit about alchemy, and I want to know, how does that alchemy fit into personal growth? Or how does it inform personal growth?
So, alchemy to me is the transmutation or the shifting of energy in the body, in the energetic system, in your being. And so, when you alchemize, in alchemy, for anybody who doesn't know, like comes from when they would transform coal to gold. And so it's a process of really using love. Love is what alchemizes and light alchemizes. So when we talk about shining the light or putting love into those spots that are dark and shadowy, that's when alchemy happens. And so it informs all of self-development because without that level of transformation in your energetic and emotional and physical system, there is no basis for everything else. The mind, yes, but we cannot ignore what's happening in our bodies. From my experience and what I've seen and what I've held, it's a pivotal piece because
Mhm.
you can't outthink your trauma.
No, wherever you go, there you are.
It's true.
And I think of alchemy, like personal alchemy, as like turning something that you have now into something precious, or recognizing the transformation or the ability to create something precious out of something ordinary.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. That's so true.
I love that too. So tell me, what do you think are the biggest lessons that you've learned in life?
It's a great question. I love this question so much. The biggest lessons I would say is that number one, love heals all. Love, in my experience, is the secret ingredient, is and love looks different in different ways, right? We know the word love, but it shows up in different ways in small moments in your life, also in big moments, right? Injecting as much compassion, kindness, gentleness, patience is the key to any alchemy and any transformation. You just can't force it. So, yeah, love is everything. And what else would I say? Everything has a cycle. There's constant cycles all the time, whether they're little tiny cycles or really big cycles. And when we allow ourselves to be in the natural flow of a cycle,
Mm.
it unfolds in mysterious and magical ways that we could not even think up on our own. So
Mm.
that surrendering to life is really more efficient
Yeah.
than trying to make something happen.
That's so true. But then I wonder, then I get all sort of philosophical and I think if everything happens the way it's meant to happen, then is it ever possible to control your life in a different way?
When I say surrender to the flow, it means that we're not passive. It's not a passive experience.
Right.
We're in consciousness.
Yeah.
We're
You have
moving.
free will.
Yes, you have free will. We're moving through life, paying attention, listening,
Mhm.
feeling. That is where the choice comes in. These moment to moment, subtle, everyday moments. And that is part of the surrender. The surrender isn't just, oh, I'm not doing anything. The surrender is, I'm listening and I'm surrendered to what my knowing is telling me. I'm surrendered to what's true.
Yeah. So who's at the wheel at any given moment? Are you driving things or are you riding the wave?
I think they're both kind of like the same in a way, actually.
Because if you
Yeah.
think of it as a wave and you're like surfing,
Yes. That's
you're
one of
like
my favorite.
rowing with the wave, but yet you're pointing the surfboard and you're controlling it. It's kind of interesting to think of it that way.
That's one of my favorite analogies,
Yeah.
actually. So, yeah, that's exactly it. Because the waves, you don't know what's going to happen in the waves, which is
Right.
like life. You can make
You have to kind of
adjustments,
be ready. Exactly. Making adjustments. I love that.
always making adjustments, and
Yeah.
always that's what I feel like is true power, is having this consciousness and awareness and making micro or macro adjustments as needed, because you can feel, because you're so in tune with what is and
Mhm.
what really is needed in that moment.
Yeah. It's so deep and it requires so much going inward. It requires you to really have a trust.
That's so important. The trust with yourself. I didn't trust myself and I
Mhm.
didn't trust the universe. I didn't trust anybody. I was so defensive and protective. Like, I was paranoid, actually. And so it has been such a journey of me learning to trust myself. And I think anybody can do this if you practice. That's really what it comes down to me in all of it. Is I consider myself a practitioner.
Yeah.
Whoever wants to expand, you need to commit to a practice. And that's not like just practicing like meditation once a day. No, it's like a living meditation.
Oh,
That's my life, is like
a living
living
meditation.
meditation.
Yeah. Ooh, I love that.
And
So what
trust me, like I said,
about
it took many, I'm
taken a while?
47. Yeah,
You
I'm
just got
47
there and
now.
you're still in process. So we all are still in process. I love that about life, that
Yes.
it's so dynamic.
Yeah, so true. And that's what makes it so exciting. There's always an adventure.
I know. And it is something new in every moment. And if you really let it go, it can happen.
Mm, it
What
really
about your
is.
blessings? What would you say are the biggest blessings for you?
Oh, my dad is
Mm.
one of my major
Where
blessings.
does he live now? Is he close to you?
No, he's in Beijing.
Oh, gee.
I
Oh,
know. He loves it there, but it's kind of sucks because he's so far. But he's happy. That's the most important thing.
yeah.
And honestly, he's healthier than most people I know, which is amazing.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah, but my dad is a huge blessing. Of course, my mom, she has given me so much, but in a different way. She really provided a foundation of courage for me, because that's really why I think I'm able to live the life I live, is because I'm not afraid to take a leap of faith or do something that might be a little scary. That was my motto for a long time, was face your fears. If I felt something, an edge, I'd lean into it. And I really believe my mom instilled this courage in me without really trying to do that. And then I'd say another blessing is my connection with the animal realm, the spirit realm, and the nature realm. I'm deeply connected to those. The nature in itself is a huge blessing. Like, I'm in deep service to the earth.
Oh, yeah. That's beautiful. What is the most important thing?
To remember who you are, to remember where you come from. And I'm talking about from the source in all aspects, but like going to the root, like remembering that there's so much more inside and available than what our ego minds think.
Yeah, we
We're
are
so much
really
more
all
powerful.
powerful.
Yeah.
Shazam.
And it took me a long time to remember who I was. Just peeling, constant peeling. And
But it's like that. Life is a lot of people go through that experience. I do. I know I do. I know it.
I
And everyone I know, I think if you're at all doing any kind of personal work, it's an ongoing process.
absolutely. And that's part of why I always remind my students that you're a practitioner. This
You're
is
a student, you're always the teacher.
absolutely. And I just, that commitment to that practice, it keeps you humble and really connected to what's important.
So what's next for you?
Oh boy. There's so many things. Yeah, I'm starting a creator program in the spring 2023, a year-long mentorship with me. I'm also setting an intention to create a retreat space at some point. I'm also bringing in new technology having to do with molecular hydrogen and how it heals on a cellular level. So there's all kinds of quantum cellular healing projects have coming.
I love that. That is
Yeah,
my alley.
always something new. Because I love, with my acupuncture background, I'm also very excited and enthusiastic about healing the body from the root. And that in Chinese medicine terms means like emotional stuff impacts the body, like we talked about earlier, but also like I'm talking about this cellular healing with the molecular hydrogen. So I'm so turned on by learning more about the body. It's so fascinating, this body of ours, and how it's connected in all these different ways.
I think we're going to make so many very interesting and profound discoveries in the near future having to do with that. There's so much on the cusp of things related to consciousness and epigenetics and quantum mechanics and things. Very,
100%.
very interesting to read about.
Yes. I love that. I'm such a geek when it comes to all that stuff.
Me too. Me too. But it's a world of possibilities, and it really just sort of reminds you that we don't know shit. We really don't.
It's so true.
It's
So true.
it's from Ozark, Ruth. We don't know shit about fuck.
I love that. So
But
good. Yeah, the more I think I know, I don't know.
I know. And I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
That's what makes the world go round. So
The mystery. I love the mystery.
right.
It really makes life so much more enjoyable when we can just accept that life is a mystery and there's so many possibilities in that mystery.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's a beautiful world in its perfect imperfection.
Yeah. And I would say on a personal level, opening up to receiving a life partner
I was
is,
gonna ask, I didn't want to necessarily go there, but I was wondering if you had a significant other or
no, I don't. I've had beautiful relationships. Uh, As you may imagine, I had lot of trouble in this area. I had a lot of anger actually in relationships. I had moments of going unconscious and like raging on people, that when I'd start feeling intimacy and this trauma would come out
Mm.
in me acting out on them. So it has been a process of healing for that as well. But now I feel like I'm ready to be with somebody in a whole new way. I haven't been like that in a while, but like I'm ready to commit in a whole new way, because I haven't really wanted to commit. I love my freedom. And yeah, I want to create with somebody. I want to create whatever the next chapter is. I want to do it with somebody.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm sure that'll be come along at just the right time.
Yep. I'm excited to meet this person. Yeah, it's going to be exciting. We'll see how it all unfolds.
Love it. Oh my God, you're fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing this time with me and your generosity of spirit and your vulnerability. I really appreciate you and everything you've gone through with us today. So thanks.
Thank you so much for having me.